My name is Peter Kelly. I'm Chief Exec of the Poverty Alliance. It's a real pleasure to have you along at this fringe meeting today, organised by IPPR Scotland, Citizens Advice Scotland and ourselves. We're here this afternoon to talk about what we think is, as we call it, a potentially transformational policy, something that could really change the face of poverty, change the face of inequality in Scotland, if we're to progressively introduce it. That's the minimum income guarantee. It is, as I say, a potentially radical transformational policy. We're at the, I think, still quite early stages of its development. Scottish Government has been very supportive, encouraging in its development. We'll say a little bit more about what that's meant in practice. But we're here today to really share some of the ideas and share some of the reasons as to why we think we need this comprehensive approach to addressing poverty in Scotland. And I'm really pleased to be joined by Emma Jackson, who is the Strategic Lead for Social Justice at Citizens Advice Scotland, and Stephen Boyd, the Director, I should say the newly minted Director of IPPR Scotland. IPPR Scotland, who played a really important role in the development of this idea of a minimum income guarantee. And we can talk a bit more about where this idea has come from. And I'm also very pleased to be joined by Colette Stevenson, who, as you'll know, is the convener of the Social Justice and Social Security Committee in the Scottish Parliament. I'm going to turn first to Emma. We'll hear from all of our speakers first, and then there'll be time for us to have some discussion and perhaps debate about this policy and how we might take it forward, how we might implement it. So, Emma, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. So as Peter has shared, in essence, a minimum income guarantee is a really simple yet highly transformative initiative that is, in a sense, all about people having enough through reform to social security, through delivering on fair work, and through reducing the cost of essential services like transport. A minimum income guarantee would deliver an income floor that nobody in Scotland would be allowed to fall below. And that currently would be just such a huge move away from where we are with things like conditionality, sanctions, and many of the other measures that we know cause destitution by design. Rather, indeed, what we would see is that every household in Scotland would have enough that is tailored to the particular needs of that household to guarantee the stability for people to live a decent, dignified, healthy, and financially stable life. Now, there's no doubting that this is a bold ambition, but it is absolutely the ambition that we need right now. In a just and compassionate Scotland, we must aspire for better for the people who live here, because right now, the idea of having enough feels so desperately far out of reach for far too many people. An impossible puzzle was how someone with lived experience described to me their financial situation, and it's really a phrase that stuck with me for quite some time. Borrow in 1 month and start in the next in the red, never enough to cover all of the essentials like food and fuel, and a budget that won't balance no matter how you move the pieces around. It's an impossible game, an impossible puzzle for so many folks. And it really is the brutal reality for tens of thousands of households across Scotland as they grapple with insufficient income and feel the relentless push towards debt and destitution. The Citizens Advice Network in Scotland provides free, confidential and person-centred advice through 59 cabs all across the nation, delivering advice to about 23,000 people per month. Almost a third of everybody that we see lives in the most deprived SIND quintile. 2/3 of everybody that we support has a disability or a long-term health condition, and social security makes up over half of all of the advice that we give out. But running like a thread through all of our evidence and advice is one key issue. The vast majority of people who contact a local cab for advice are struggling to have enough money to live a decent and dignified life. About 50% of those who come and seek debt help from us have what's known as a deficit budget, So even if we were to provide a debt solution for them and help them to get out of debt, the long-term outcome for that household is going to be there is not enough money to cover all of the essentials, and it leads to either one or both of these predictable outcomes, debt or destitution. And if you were to chat to any of the advisors in cabs across Scotland right now, they talk to you not only about the rise in demand for advice, but about the complexity of situations that people face. Research carried out by Professor Morag Traynor on behalf of Aberlour Children's Charity has shown that more than half of low-income households in Scotland who are in receipt of universal credit have a deduction to the DWP to cover public debts. And we know that that places extraordinary pressure on budgets that are already on a knife edge. And so households are experiencing giving with one hand and taking with the other, and that has a hugely detrimental impact. We also know when and how public debt is pursued, in particularly council tax debt, not only is hard for people, but it worsens their financial situations, also putting strain on relationships, on local services, and really pushes people to the very edge of their mental well-being. Many people in debt would report that they have either seriously considered or attempted suicide because they don't believe that there's a way out of their situation. And because of this, at Citizens Advice Scotland, we know one of the fastest growing reasons for this complexity of issues that people are facing is this insufficient income. People do not have enough money to live on. I wanted to tell you about one family in particular this evening. I'm going to call them the Campbell family. Campbells have 3 children, well, one of which has quite a complex disability, which means they require 24 hours care. They've been struggling for quite some time to make it through each month, to have sufficient money for everything that they need, and that's forced them into regular food bank use. They were accessing a food bank that was working in collaboration with a local cab to try to provide an increased amount of advice for that family and do some income maximisation activities and provide some emergency support. And the Campbells chose a cash grant through this project, and by doing that, they actually chose to give their children a treat. They chose to buy their children some ice cream. And Mrs. Campbell actually sent a thank you card to the local cab that had a picture of the children on the front of it and of their sort of smiling faces, all covered in ice cream. And it said, "These faces say it all, a moment of joy." But for the Campbells, it sadly was a moment, because despite all of the income maximisation activities done by the local cab, there isn't enough money for that household to cover all of their essentials. And the path ahead for the Campbells looks like destitution and going without, or rising debts. And that's some of the reality that we really need to face, because the experiences of the Campbell family are not isolated, they are happening at scale across Scotland. And these experiences cost all of us. First and foremost, it costs the Campbell family. They are experiencing untold physical and mental harm and being robbed of their potential to contribute properly to their community, to society, and to all of Scotland. Their experiences also costs the food bank and the cab, because the staff there are not just supporting that one family with that one issue, they're supporting family after family, and advisors are going home thinking about the complex situations people in their communities are facing. Vicarious trauma is very real, and it affects the well-being of the advisors, who then are struggle to go back into the office the next day and do their jobs. And the Campbells' experience costs all of us, because unfortunately it means that with worsening physical and mental ill health, it's putting pressure on NHS services that are already stretched beyond demand. It's taking people out of the labour force market who want to work and progress and do good things. And so these are the things that we need to look at very carefully. Situations like this clearly demonstrate why a minimum income guarantee is needed. And this is where we have an incredible opportunity here in Scotland at the moment to progress an idea like a minimum income guarantee, to give that income floor to families and households and individuals like the Campbells. We are going to have a very real opportunity as the expert group delivers their final report and makes recommendations to the Scottish Government at the end of this year. And we perhaps also have an opportunity with the new UK government, who've already committed to a review of things like universal credit, because we know the design failings in universal credit present a huge challenge. We know that there's a very difficult fiscal environment in the UK and in Scotland right now, but we cannot let those who are already experiencing the most harm suffer more. We should refuse to let inequality grow further. We should have the wisdom and ambition to want to invest in our citizens, to create a level playing field from which everybody not only has the foundation to build their potential from and escape the all-consuming burden of poverty, but to be able to flourish. And in a just and compassionate Scotland, our collective aspiration must be for everybody to have enough.
Thanks very much, Emma. I'll just pass the floor directly to Stephen.
Hello, good afternoon everybody, delighted to be here. So let me just start by saying a wee bit about who IPP are. We're a think tank or a research organisation. We aim to influence public policy in pursuit of a fairer, greener and more prosperous Scotland. So we undertake research and analysis and develop new ideas. We're a charity working on a cross-party basis. So as Peter said at the start, IPPR Scotland have been very heavily involved in the minimum income guarantee agenda from the start. I should say I have not, and as Peter said, I've just taken up this post. It's the end of my 4th week in post, I think. So I'm still getting my head around aspects of the agenda. We'll today make more apologies for focusing on those parts of the agenda that I'm most familiar with. So I've been posed the task of discussing how do we get there, which is quite a tricky one. So I think, you know, like Emma, I'd start by just recognising the scale of the challenge. I think it's important we do that. You know, we have come through a period where sustained real-term cuts in benefits have had or are having a catastrophic impact on the living standards of poorer households. The basic rate of unemployment benefit is stuck at broadly the same terms rate as it was in the 1980s. So zero growth in unemployment benefit at a time when wages have had a 50% real terms increase. So those on benefits are just falling further and further behind. And when we take into account all the benefit changes since 2010, they've reduced incomes of the households in the bottom fifth by an average of £2,800. And bear in mind that's an average, so for some households the impact will be even more severe. So things are grim, and turning this situation around will require a significant and bold policy response, which is why we're discussing things like the minimum income guarantee. And I think it's very important to say at the outset, although people have varying views on the role that growth can play in addressing this problem, I for one think that growth is not unimportant, but if we don't restore the link between benefits and wages, then growth will leave further behind those households who rely on benefits to sustain their incomes. So growth is not a solution in and of itself. But I'd just like to quickly focus on 2 issues related to the MIG. First one is how can the world of work be reformed to contribute to our minimum income guarantee? The second will be how can a minimum income guarantee be paid for? So the first, in terms of the world of work, I think it's important to ask ourselves, what's the fundamental problem when we think about what's wrong in the workplace today? I would argue it's an asymmetry of economic power between the employer and the worker. Now, measures like increasing national minimum wage and strengthening employment rights have a role to play, but they have very limited impact on addressing that fundamental problem. So to do that, I think we need to look at measures like boosting trade union organisation and membership, and crucially broadening collective bargaining coverage. You look at those countries in Europe who managed to sustain much higher living standards across the whole spectrum, and one of the distinguishing characteristics of their societies is very broad collective bargaining coverage. Workers just have more power within the workplace, and you see that impact in terms of wages and in terms of benefits. But, and this is a huge but, and I think it points towards an issue we'll have to be thinking about at the moment. Improving the world of work is at best a partial answer to the problem of stagnating or falling incomes in the bottom 20% of households. Why is inequality drifted up through the 2010s at a time when wage growth at the bottom end of the spectrum has been quite strong due to significant increases in the national minimum wage, and where the employment rate for poorer households has grown significantly? It's fallen because there have been significant and sustained attacks on the real value of benefits. That benefit income was just crucial to these households, and we can't ignore that. Just to quote one of my favourite commentators, a guy called Mark Brunick, who runs the People's Policy Project think tank in America, and he points out that payments to capital and labour do not take into account differences in household composition, so they can never be reformed in a way that generates an egalitarian society. That's the truth we must all recognise. It's important to do what we can in the labour market, it's important to equalise power within the workplace, but underpinning the incomes of households at the bottom end of the distribution, we still need a strong and fair benefits regime. We can't lose sight of that. So secondly, paying for a MIG. It's not easy. I mean, as fair as Peter's probably more up to date in the kind of estimates of the cost, but I've seen a new estimate recently that if the minimum income guarantee was going to be set at the level of minimum income standard, then the cost in Scotland would be around about £17 billion. So that is clearly very significant. And getting from here to there would be a real challenge. I think there's also proposals that in the initial stages the minimum income guarantee would be set a bit lower than that. But nevertheless, we're talking significant amounts of money. So I think it's important to tie this to the desperate need to have a much more mature and evidence-based discussion about how we tax and the level at which we tax. Now, other countries around Europe manage to achieve total tax revenues significantly higher than us. If you look at the UK, Germany achieves tax revenues about 4% higher than the UK, France about 11%, in between you've got a whole host of countries, the Nordics, Belgium, Austria, they all manage to achieve much higher tax revenues than we do. If you're talking 6 or 7% of GDP, that's an awful lot of money, you know. Now, jumping from where we are, particularly given that the UK is kind of a low trust society at the moment, trusting politicians, trusting government is running the low, taxing significantly higher will be a challenge. But we need to get there. You look at the great challenge we're all facing as a society at the moment, in terms of the distributional challenge we're discussing, the environmental challenge, the demographic challenge. It's very difficult to see any way forward through the course of the 21st century that taxes have to rise. So it's a question of how we do that. So there are things that we can do immediately, I would argue. We can reform corporation tax. We need to start taxing wealth more than we do at the moment. Wealth has risen about 6 times the rate of income over the last couple of decades. It's very difficult taxing wealth. A lot of countries struggle to do it, but you know there are some simple things we could do. We can reform council tax. We can equalise capital gains tax with income tax. We can reform inheritance tax. These are the kind of simple things. And then you can look at things like the Wealth Tax Commission in the UK proposed a number of years back for a one-off tax on wealth. Countries such as Switzerland and Norway do manage to levy annual rates of taxation on wealth. You know, other countries have tried and failed. It is difficult. But through the course of a century, again, if we're going to meet the challenges society faces, then we have to be looking at taxing wealth more. So there's no simple agenda for raising these taxes. There are a number of options open to us at both Scottish and UK level. We have to engage in that debate in a much more serious way than we've done up until now. So just to conclude, and I want to leave enough time for discussion at the end, but how do we get there to a minimum income guarantee? Well, we have to have that sensible evidence-based discussion about how we raise tax as a proportion of GDP. We have to pursue significant reform within the workplace and accept the limits of what that can achieve in terms of underpinning our minimum income guarantee. We have to look at a range of complementary interventions, especially in housing, childcare and energy. We have to do some simple but potentially expensive things at UK level. We have to remove the 2-child limit. We have to restore the balance between wages and benefits. That's really important if we want to ensure that lower income households don't fall further behind. And finally, we have to bring forward serious plans for a minimum income guarantee in Scotland. Thankfully, the expert group is doing that at this moment in time, and I expect the report to be publishing over the next few months. I'll leave it there.
Thanks very much. For those of you in the room that don't know me, I am Colette Stevenson, the MSP for East Kilbride, and as Peter pointed out, I'm the convener for social justice and social security. So just before I sort of get into the element of what the Scottish Government are doing in terms of the minimum income guarantee, I just want to sort of touch upon the taxation element and my sort of background and how I actually get involved in politics. I actually in 2013 decided to go, well, I was completing my degree in accountancy at the time, and I realised just how bad our taxation system was here in the UK. And at that point the independence question was coming up, so I decided that I was going to go and explore it further from an economic point of view, from a taxation point of view, and even from the level of poverty that we were experiencing, that we've seen a way back in the Thatcherite years as well, and not much had changed since then. So I'm all for changing the way capital gains tax is out, corporation tax, and even a more progressive taxation system as well. And that was kind of the foundation for why I ended up getting involved in politics as well. And having come from a single parent family, I think as well, I had my own lived experience as well of dealing with that. So I just thought I'd give you a wee bit of a intro and insight as to how I actually get involved in it. So it's an absolute honour as well to be able to sit here and chat with you today. So as Peter pointed out, the SNP is exploring how to guarantee a minimum acceptable standard of living for everyone in Scotland, and meeting our needs for housing, for food and for essentials. So the Scottish Government has started the work to deliver, I'll call it a MIG, if you're all okay with that, which would probably ensure that everyone in Scotland could live healthily and fulfilling lives as well. So as Scotland faces renewed Westminster austerity, the UK Government must urgently fix the fundamental flaws which universal credit, and that's been alluded to already, that are driving destitution and people to food banks as well. So with the full powers of independence and an independent Scotland, away from Westminster austerity under Labour now and the Tories, we in Scotland could make different choices and we could go so much further. So in 2021, just to give you a wee bit of background, and we laid it out, that was when we were first elected, I was first elected in May 21. We laid out in the SNP manifesto, the Scottish Government would begin to work to deliver a MIG which would ensure that everyone in Scotland lived healthier, more fulfilling lives. So it builds on the work obviously from the last Parliament as well, during which the SNP Scottish Government funded 4 local authorities to explore the feasibility of piloting a citizen's basic income in Scotland. So the pilot concluded that while we cannot bring forward a full citizen's basic income until Scotland is independent, because most often not, we've got one hand tied behind our back. But what we should do all we can with the current powers to offer safety and security and dignity, and that's at the heart of the society here in Scotland as well. So a steering group was set up in 2021 as the first step on the road to establishing a Scottish minimum income guarantee, and it was made up of trade unions, academia and poverty and equality groups as well. So the aim of the MIG was to provide everyone in Scotland, as I said, with a minimum acceptable standard of living, guaranteeing that people have enough money for housing, food and essentials. So this would allow people across the country to live a decent and healthy and financially secure life. So such a policy as well has the potential to deliver truly transformational change in reducing poverty and inequality. And one thing I will say, and I have sat on the cross-party group, I've kind of weaved in and out of it in terms of poverty, but one thing that is really sticks with me, it hasn't been mentioned yet, is the stigma associated with poverty. And it runs right through the whole aspect to that. The stigma is awful, particularly for children presenting at school, and even from a health perspective as well, and that therein lies the problem in terms of inequality and poverty. The stigma is vast, and we need to really do major work, and I hope that will come out in the report as well, and the research that's been carried out in terms of I mean, you hear all the time about young people presenting with a lot of different mental health problems that they didn't have before. I truly believe that is in relation to the element of poverty that they're experiencing right now. So in terms of the research on the economic impact of the Scottish MIG, when it was published during the summer, research commissioned by the MIG expert group and looking at evidence of MIG-like policies elsewhere in Europe that you touched upon as well, recommended that the Scottish Government consider the following. So I'll point out some of the things that the recommendations were. So they were setting appropriate targets to monitor the MIG's performance, the importance of a multifaceted approach to delivering MIG, and placing a more flexible approach as well to conditionality at the heart of MIG, and ensuring that the MIG recognises and financially supports groups that are currently disadvantaged right now. So in the broader economic climate, as MIG becomes introduced into our society as well. So right now, in the face of the most challenging financial circumstances in the history of devolution, the SNP and government is delivering almost £3 billion a year to actually directly support low-income households. So some of the measures that you'll be aware of as well in terms of trying to tackle the cost of living crisis here is obviously the game-changing Scottish Child Payment. So Social Security Scotland that was set up have got 5 family payments, and the actual Scottish Child Payment itself is probably worth about £25,000 by the time a child actually reaches the age of 16 as well. We've also got our 1140 hours of high quality funded early learning and childcare. Now I've actually, in terms of our committee, we actually done a really good piece of work, and it was on parental employment inquiry, and that kind of ties in nicely with some of the things that we're talking about today. And that I think, you know, there's a push and there's been lots of recommendations came forward from the committee that we're going to be following up on with the CABSEC as well at committee to see what we can take forward there. And that falls into childcare, more flexible, more accessible, more affordable childcare as well, but also looking at education and getting families back into, you know, decent employment and a decent wage as well. So the other thing as well that we brought in as part of the Scottish Government was our free school meals to all pupils in primaries 1 to 5 and in special schools as well. Can I just touch upon that? I remember I had free school meals, I had to get free school dinners when I was at school. See the stigma associated with that. I found that really, really difficult. And there was no option there to go and get or ask your dad for a packed lunch or whatever, or go and buy something. So I fully welcome that, and I'd like to see it taken a bit further forward as well. So again, just sort of moving on, we also brought in free bus travel for over 2 million people here in Scotland, and over 90 million this year in discretionary housing payments to mitigate the bedroom tax and the benefit cap, which is woeful here in Scotland. And then we've brought in more than 35 million in payments through the Scottish Welfare Fund. Now I took evidence from the third sector organisation the other day there, particularly to do with funding principles. And one of the things that they were doing in Dundee was something really interesting. I don't know if you're aware of that, Peter, but Scottish Welfare Fund. And what they felt was that there was barriers getting put up right, left and centre from local authorities, yet they actually decided to put it out to one of the TSI networks and SCDO so that it was getting allocated fairer as well. So that was something that the committee actually picked up on, and we said that we were going to look at it further and look at the details. So we were. So again, the SNP, Scottish Government action, is making a huge difference, and that's been evidenced as well, particularly with our game-changing Scottish Child Payment. The average poverty and child poverty levels in Scotland are lower than in England and in Wales, and child poverty levels are estimated 10% points lower than they are otherwise would they have been a result of a devolved policies that we've introduced and that I've mentioned already. So obviously we have an acute awareness of economic and fiscal realities. The First Minister has made eradicating child poverty and improving improving public services two of his 4 core principles as well for Scotland. So with obviously the full powers of an independent state, away from Westminster austerity under Labour now, and previously the Tories, we in Scotland could make a huge difference, and we could do so much better as well. Particularly, again, I'm going to touch upon progressive tax regime compared to what we've got just now. So building a new Scotland paper came out, and it was social security in an independent Scotland, and it lays out how independence could offer a fairer and a more dignified and a more respectful approach to social security. Now, I've been out to visit social security in Dundee, and that's what I heard loud and clear from the staff who previously used to work for the DWP, and had actually probably transferred over to social security. They said it was a much better way of working with people, and even taking evidence from folk that have gone through that journey, they've said as well it's been a much more dignified, fairer approach as well. So again, the proposals included in terms of independent of Brexit Britain, that we've all been impacted by, and the Scottish MIG as well, it could effectively set a higher rate than the current UK government benefits that we've got, and there is response to real change as well to the cost of living crisis that we're dealing with, and it will also enable households to live with financial security, and at the heart of that is what we are striving for a better society here in Scotland as well. So again, ensuring that those who are able to achieve the minimum income level through fair and accessible paid work as well, and that's something that our inquiry will take forward. In independent European countries that are comparable to Scotland as well, it proves that a strong social security system means a more fairer and more equal nation as well, with lower rates of child poverty. So when social security is managed well, as in the Nordic countries that we've seen, it provides people with assurance and choices as well throughout their working lives, and it is a genuine safety net as well. So the SNP is determined to win for Scotland the vital decision-making powers that come with independence. However, as the First Minister has made clear, this will not stop the Scottish Government from taking all the action it can towards the goal to eradicate child poverty here in our society. And I look forward to working alongside all our colleagues as well, along with academia, along with Poverty Alliance and the other groups as well, in order that we can try and do that. So in the meantime, I'll try and wrap up, probably fed up listening to me. Pass over to Peter. Scotland faces renewed Westminster austerity. The UK government must urgently fix the fundamental flaws of universal credit, ones that are driving people into destitution and having to rely on food banks as well. That is why the SNP supported the call from the Trussell Trust, Joseph Rowntree Foundation and others for an essential guarantee to be applied to universal credit and other reserved benefits as well. So this would ensure that social security adequately cover the cost of essentials and better protect our most vulnerable people in our society. So obviously the Scottish Government, we can't change these policies, the ones that are reserved, whilst most of the welfare expenditure and income replacement benefits remain completely reserved to Westminster. But we will damn well try our hardest, so we will. So I'll leave it at that, and thank you very much for listening to me.
Thanks very much, Colette. We've got a little bit of time for questions to our panel, or just questions to each other about how we achieve the kind of vision that's been set out. I think all of our speakers have really outlined the challenges that we face in Scotland with respect to poverty and inequality. The minimum income guarantee is very much a ambitious idea, and one that's still very much in development. And I should say I am on the expert group that's developing this policy, so look out, and at Christmas this will be the gift that we give you, is a big report on how we can implement a minimum income guarantee. But the way that we're framing it at the moment in the expert group is to think of a roadmap towards a minimum income guarantee, that this is not something that we're going to implement in full completely next year or even the year after, or perhaps even in the course of the next Parliament, but it's something that we can build right now. There are steps that we can take right now to take us towards a minimum income guarantee. Colette has mentioned some of the building blocks that we have in Scotland already, Scottish Child Payment being a really crucial one, and I think I want to preempt the expert reports too much, but I suspect that we will see that has been a key area that we need to make progress on. There's been discussions around how we can develop a minimum income guarantee focused around carers. There's been some discussion about, can we look at young people? We had an excellent fringe meeting this morning with Independent Age, thinking about, where I contributed, thinking about how does a minimum income guarantee affect older people. So this is something, there is a lot of scope for us to go further on. We've heard about some of the challenges, but it's now over to you to ask some questions of the panel or to get your own reflections. I'm going to ask my colleague, yes, Chloe, if you could. There'll be a roving mic winding its way towards you. And we'll maybe take 3 questions first and then come back to the panel. So, woman at the back.
I've got a big difference anyway, so I'm Claire Adams, the MSP's office manager. We grind all the feedbacks in the area. I think the mix is an excellent idea, but it can be detrimental to so many people because it then knocks them out with the housing benefits. I've got a guy who I worked with 23 beds over and is now in mega debt. So that's what we need to be so careful of, especially with pensions as well. If we had full fiscal autonomy, great, but we don't. And all the things that we do help people with, Westminster just take it back off them. So we need to be so careful.
Great, thank you. There's another gentleman here, and then the woman at the front.
Hi, Andrew Reynolds from Young Lives versus Cancer. I'm encouraged by a lot of what's been said, particularly around sort of benefits being tied to the needs of each individual household. I think it's important to recognise that the needs of each household can be complex and change rapidly along with income levels. In our own work, we know that when a family has a child that's diagnosed with cancer, their income levels drop by around about £6,000. A third of families have their income drop by £10,000 or more. In addition to that, they also face additional costs, like £250 every month just to travel for treatment. So I think in terms of thinking about the needs of individual families, it has to account for, medical needs and travel for medical needs. And a lot of the time, when thinking about poverty, we think a lot about low-income households, and that's right. But a lot of these families who we see who need to receive our grants were not originally low-income households, but because of sickness, they suddenly drop, and result of many other increased costs they face around heating, etc., which suddenly push them into poverty. Yeah, that's.
myself on the face and gallery. Just to add to what you said there, I think we should look at some of the advantages of the universal income. In that it'll allow, for instance, families in your situation not to have to work full time because they know that there's a basic income coming into their house, and one of the parents can afford to take time off work to be with the child. Also for mums at work, they might be able to then organise their work so that they can be home at the end of the school day for the children coming home. That would reduce a lot of the strain and stresses in families, and I think that would eventually go through towards the health service because there would be less calls for antidepressants and parents that are at their end of their tether as well. So I think there's an awful lot of positives in this. We had a person who was a retained firefighter and who was able then to be able to go out and do other work in the community, one of which was cutting enormous hedges, which we couldn't manage to do for ourselves. Because he had that backup of having a basic income, that he didn't need to always have to look for the best job possible or the most money that you could get out of it. So I think it would add a lot to the community as well. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'm going to ask my panel to come in just by a show of hands who wants to go first. But just before I do, I'm going to regularly abuse my position as chair. And it's one just on your final point, because I think you've gone straight to really quite a challenging issue for us in terms of how we advocate for a minimum income guarantee, and it's the distinction between universal basic income and minimum income guarantee. The minimum income guarantee, I need to be very clear, is a targeted payment, as our colleague there said, a targeted payment on families who need it. Now, as Stephen mentioned, the threshold that we anticipate for a minimum income guarantee is significantly higher than the threshold for social security benefits at the moment, and that's what makes the difference. But I think understanding that difference, that it's not an unconditional flat rate payment that everyone would receive, is a very different kind of, not very different, but a different kind of approach to supporting people into addressing poverty. But it would share many of those, I think the same benefits that you've talked about would come from the implementation of a minimum income guarantee. I'm not going to hog the floor anymore. So who would like to come back on any of those issues around thresholds for entitlement, about the complexity dynamics around household needs and poverty and additional costs, and any other issues?
No, I just wanted to touch upon what you were saying in terms of particularly children who are suffering from varying degrees of illnesses as well, and the impact that that has on. As an MSP, we're currently dealing with casework, so much associated with poverty, housing, particularly families impacted by children who have got varying degrees of illnesses as well. One thing that we've done in our office is wrote to the Minister from the new UK Labour, because what you've got to bear in mind as well is employment law is reserved. So that's a huge issue. And we wrote to them in terms of asking employment law, as well as looking at, I'm fully supportive of the trade unions as well, but looking at more flexibility for people who are suffering from cancer or having to take time off, and in that respect, rather than making it worse. As you said, the average is what, 6,000 per year that they're losing in salaries. Something needs to, give on that one. So we have wrote to them, and we're still waiting on a response back as well. But that's where, when I said earlier, we're constantly working with one hand tied behind our back, purely because of the reserved issues there. And so far, Labour haven't, been very, I've instilled maybe any confidence yet in terms of that. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
That's great, thank you. I think all of the questions together are sort of making a couple of things kind of bubble up in my head, and it's linked to a point that Stephen made about, I guess, ultimately the sort of sustained attacks that we've seen on the welfare system. Social security should be a safety net that catches any of us that need it, and undoubtedly that safety net has gaping holes in it at the moment, and people are kind of falling through the cracks. And the very most foundational thing about a minimum income guarantee is in the word guarantee. It is an income floor that we're going to say we will not let people in Scotland fall below that. So with the example that you brought there of just a few pence, you know, people then dip under and then lose a huge amount of income that's coming through payments. The whole premise of a MIG would be is that there is an agreed minimum income standard or a floor that is set, and people would not fall through from there. So it's a really different way of looking at the issue, so that the social security system does act as a safety net. And I think when you bring up illnesses like cancer and many of the other kind of fluctuating illnesses that we know that happen to people, or dynamic situations that can happen in all of our lives that are perhaps unpredictable, like redundancy, relationship breakdown, those sorts of things that push people then into a financial situation. Again, a minimum income guarantee is built on a premise that can cope with dynamic and fluctuating conditions from the beginning, whereas we have quite a binary situation at the beginning. So I'm not saying that the solutions to deliver on those are easy, but the school of thought that a MIG is being built on is picking up on all of those things.
Yeah, I don't have a great deal to add. I think just the example you provide there just kind of shows up, I think, the downside of the current UK tax and benefit regime that creates these massive marginal tax rates for those right at the bottom. If you had those at the top facing those marginal tax rates, it would never be often used. The number one story I've made, because they affect those at the bottom, then you don't hear that much about it. It's a really bad commentary on the state of affairs with the tax and benefit regime at the moment. The only other point, it's just a point a number of people referred to the safety net of the social security regime. I think that's absolutely fair, and I've used that language myself, but we should also think of it as a springboard as well. It's more than just a safety net, and a number of people prefer to other countries in Europe to do these things better than we do. What the strong social safety net springboard, call it we want, but a robust social security system does is provides a springboard for entrepreneurial risk taking, for people to take risk within the labour market. You know, it underpins their much more dynamic economies. I mean, you often hear, for 15 years I worked at the Scottish TUC, and I constantly find myself in arguments with employer organisations and employers who kind of assume that if you spend more on social security, the impact on the economy must be negative. But we have all these examples around the world that kind of stand in stark contrast to that. You know, they tax more, they spend much more on labour market measures than we do, and yet their economies are much more dynamic, productive and innovative than ours are. And we have to start thinking about the social security regime in those terms as well. That underpins a good economy for everyone.
So, many more questions. I'm going to take Sabir first, and then Lily there, and then Louise there. We'll get to your promise. So, we'll keep our answers as brief as we possibly can.
Thanks. Thanks everyone. Really helpful contributions and questions as well. I'm Sabir Saz, Chief Executive of Scottish Refugee Council. Obviously, poverty affects everyone. It's soul destroying, and it affects people's confidence. An example of the Campbell family. But sadly, for people who are forced to flee their homes due to war, conflict, and human rights violations, poverty is even worse, and it just really stops people in their tracks from that journey of integration and being part of our society, developing a sense of belonging and playing an active role. I think on reflection, as a person coming from a refugee background myself, having lived through war and conflict and then coming to the UK, I think Scotland and more widely the UK, we're not poor. We're far from being a poor country. Why are we not coming out of poverty? That key question. I don't think we've got strategies over strategies of eradicating poverty, helping communities, all these various approaches. What can we do to really transform people's lives? So I just read £2 billion not claimed in benefits. So it's not that the support is not there, but some people, for a variety of reasons, lack of confidence, fear of authority, a fine that you might have had once for claiming something wrongly, may not claim what they're entitled to. I mean, what could be done to bring people closer to their rights? The very little that we have, how can we make sure that people have access to it without any fear and any barriers, and including newly arrived communities as well. We work with people who've arrived with really good level of English language and skills as well. So one question that was posed to me once by somebody who arrived from Afghanistan and said, well, if I could work during war for a British company, why can't I work in the peace in Scotland for Britain and have a job here? Those people knowing that if you work, you could still claim some benefits if you've got a large family, but that kind of fear of not knowing what will happen to you if you found work or if you had your housing benefit affected, and how many hours could you work to still have your universal credit? So just how do we make sure people know what their rights are and how they can access them as well?
Hi, I'm Adana. I'm from Falkirk. At the moment, I'm branchless due to some internal issues that's going on in Falkirk. But anyway, my background's education, then moved into local government, and I'm now in the tourist industry. I welcome what our government is doing and the agencies that are looking at this to draw our country out of poverty, because obviously we take everybody forward with us when we move into independence. But the thing that's niggling in the back of my mind is letting companies that are making vast amounts of profit on the back of that, especially in our tourist industry. Our tourist industry is one of the worst paid and worst conditions, yet you rely, and spoke about it in conference today, about how important tourism is in Scotland, yet we've got so much people, and a lot of young people, that are getting totally exploited within our tourist industry and the hotel industry. And you know, we ourselves were sitting in our capital city, and the cost of hotel rooms in our capital city, but most of the people that are working in the hotels will be on minimum wage. I think minimum wage has been one of the worst things that's totally backfired, because companies think they're doing well by giving the minimum wage. You're doing legally what's right. So my concern is obviously if we have this minimum payment that people are entitled to, then will companies that are only interested in profit, they're not interested in paying any money back into our country. Most of the big hotel chains are normally based in Scotland. So, you know, that side is kind of niggling in the back of my mind, and how do we raise people out of poverty without having to rely on a benefit? Because as you've said, stigma is a huge thing, working with children in education. Stigma is a huge thing, and I don't want to have to work all week to then have to rely on a top up from my government. I want to pay back, you know, contribute to my government to encourage my country. So how do we move that forward?
And then I think, please.
Hi, thanks for this discussion today. It's really interesting. Independent age that Peter mentioned, and we had a sprint event this morning, so our focus was on how a MIC could work for older people in Scotland. It is really important that social security is reformed and that benefit uptake strategy is played out. But I just wanted to ask about what you think, what action is needed to reduce household incomes as well as part of the MIC, and if that is something that we should take in our colleagues as well as we have to say.
Thanks very much, Louise. I'm going to ask the panel to go in reverse order, because I'm just realising we're at 5:30. I thought we had time for another round of questions. But I think we're running fast running out of time, so Stephen, I'm going to hand to you first.
Okay, right, I'll maybe just go for the first two questions then if we're a wee bit tight for time. So on your point about refugees, I mean, it's just something, when you look at the challenges facing the economy at the moment with all this wasted human potential, it's just really tragic. But I mean, you ask the point, which I think is a really crucial one, it gets to the heart of a lot of issues that I don't think we're really grasping at the moment, is why don't people claim benefits? I would argue because successive governments have managed, whether deliberately or whether as a byproduct of their policies, to establish this view of the welfare state as a kind of them and us situation. So you have us who work hard and pay our taxes, and you have them who claim these benefits. And that is not a reflection of reality, it's not the way the world works. But I think we've kind of lost the ability to articulate what the welfare state is for, and what functions it performs. So it performs the Robin Hood function, i.e. it redistributes from rich to poor, and it performs the piggy bank function, so it smooths consumption across lifestyles. We all use the welfare state, particularly when we're young and we're old, that we all benefit from it. And I think if you were to rewind 40, 50 years, I think that was kind of understood in the public debate, that the welfare state was good for us all. And I think we've lost that, and I think it has become that there in our situation. I think we all have a really strong task in trying to undo that situation. On the tourism point, I have to disagree with you about the national minimum wage. I think that has been the most successful policy intervention in the last 30 years. I was having a discussion with my partner who, when the minimum wage was introduced, was working part-time in a pub in Glasgow, and we did the sums, and the wage she was receiving at the time, if in real terms, would now be half of what she would receive in the minimum wage. So if you remove the minimum wage, all these employers going back to that asymmetry of economic power in the workplace, they would wield that in their own interest, and they would pay much lower wages at the bottom end. The minimum wage has brought up wages at the bottom end very, very significantly. But I agree with you about tourism. There's a better way of doing things. Now, the Scottish Government published its National Strategy for Economic Transformation a few years ago, and kind of hidden away near the back, there's this commitment to look at sectoral collective bargaining mechanisms in hospitality and social care. There's a lot of examples from the world, particularly in Australia and what was tried recently in New Zealand, that we can learn from. They're very similar labour markets to us, similar history and culture, etc. We should be looking at what we can do to establish some collective bargaining mechanism in that sector. Now, we have to recognise it's not currently unionised. The unions would have a slightly different role than they have, but they should be involved. Government or an agency of government has to take control of that situation, bring employers together and impose some kind of collective bargaining mechanism in that sector. That would work much better than what we have at the moment.
Try to speak quickly. I'm going to try and offer some reflections to the first and kind of the third question around that. One of the ways that my little brain tries to think about a MIG is a three-legged stool. So we've got the issues around employment, stuff around social security, and then around services. And for the whole thing to work, all three legs need to be firmly on the ground and working in harmony and synchronicity with one another. So it's absolutely right that we tease out some of the other issues that you mentioned, that the Scottish Government does have devolved powers to look at around things like housing, around things like transport, because there are actions that kind of could be taken that will contribute to this, as Peter mentioned, long-term iterative journey towards a minimum income guarantee. Just need to keep moving forward in the right steps, in the right direction. Undoubtedly, those who have no recourse to public funds experience some of the most devastating levels of destitution across Scotland, and we need to try to think about where and how we can pull levers as we develop a MIG that are within our power. So yes, of course, there are many things that are reserved to Westminster that either can't be changed or would be very long term for us to change, but where are the levers that we could pull? So whilst we can't change things potentially around employment quickly, could we change things around services? Could we change things around transport for those who don't have recourse to public funds, and actually push forward issues that would make a real difference there? And then I guess very finally, why do we still have poverty? I have no silver bullet kind of answer to that question, other than I guess to offer some reflections about poverty happens in all of people's lives. Issues around housing and around social security and around stigma and around food security, insecurity, they're all happening together and affecting people as one. We need much better policy coherence across government portfolios and between governments, so that we think about people's whole lives and try to find solutions that don't have unintended consequences in different places, and that we take a rights-based approach. The Human Rights Bill in Scotland provides us with a potentially brilliant opportunity to drive a rights-based agenda, and I think that's something again we need to keep moving forward with.
Thank you, and I'll try and pick up on some of the points and highlight, in light of some of the comments that have been made, just some of the work that's been undertaken, i.e. from our committee, and holding the Scottish Government as well, to, in terms of scrutiny-wise as well. So you touched upon, obviously, the refugee situation. I can comment from a community point of view within East Kilbride. We currently have a group of asylum seekers within East Kilbride, and there's been some fantastic work being carried out in terms of integration, signposting them in terms of what help and support they've got. Again, some of the really bad press that's come out recently, and one of the things that we did at my office, along with some other stakeholders within the town, was went and gave them some really good, reassurances as well. And bear in mind as well, these young men who are absolutely fleeing some of the worst atrocities that they've ever read in their life, want to work, they want to go on and develop themselves. They're learning English. We've got a retired lecturer who's helping the community to do that, in terms of helping them out. But also, they're only getting something like, I think it's £7 a week.
£8.86.
Sorry?
£8.86.
It's £8.86. I mean, that is awful. It really is awful. But there has been some really, really good practice carried out within East Kilbride in terms of trying to integrate them into the community, but also signposting them so that they're not, falling into poverty in terms of legal help and translation and whatnot as well. The other thing we touched upon is tourism, and having been a Unite rep prior to being involved in politics, one of the things that they worked upon, I remember doing, was a lot to do with precarious working practices, particularly within the entertainment sector, nighttime sector, as well as tourism as well. Now, I don't know, I can't comment on any other union, but what I do know that Unite at one point were doing a really fantastic, it's basically a campaign that they were reducing the cost and speaking to employers. So for younger people who were on less pay, it was something like £1. But again, touching upon that collective bargaining, we've seen from the Tory government, their lack of support within unionised employment practices. So we need to push that, and I'd like to see Labour taking that forward as well. But I do know that Unite pay, they'll only take a token amount of what you can even afford in order to get union representation. And more often than not, what you find is it's younger people need support compared to others that don't have the backgrounds in terms of their rights within employment as well. One of the things the committee's doing as well, obviously we've got the Child Poverty Act that came in. We agreed that next year we're going to be looking at what they call post-legislative scrutiny, which is basically to see how well it's doing, and we'll obviously take inquiry and evidence sessions and see what better work can be done there. The other thing is, I've touched upon housing. It's absolutely crucial that everybody, has that basic roof over their head, and they're warm and they're secure. There's a housing bill coming forward. Social justice and social security are the second lead on homelessness, and that touches upon a lot of younger people as well in our communities. So we're going to be looking at that and seeing what the work that is coming from there, but it should be out actually within probably the next 2 months or so as well. And it was actually really good. Yesterday I was out in one of the high schools in East Kilbride, and they've set up what they call a pupil parliament in light of the UNCHR that's came through, and they're represented from S2 up to S6 with a focus on how they can do better in lighting with their human rights in terms of their school community and taking that forward. And that legacy will live on in that school. It's absolutely fantastic that work is underway as well. The other thing, just quickly, I know, sorry Peter, but independent age, one thing that's come out for me, right, in terms of focusing on the benefits in social security is there's a advocacy service that the Scottish Government have brought out a contract on, and what stood out for me is it's not getting publicised enough in order to help people, particularly independent age and older people and people with additional support needs, get assistance when claiming the right benefits and all their benefits, as well as exploring what other benefits, whether it's to do with health issues and whatnot. And just lastly, there will be an interim review coming out in October on the work undertaken on the adult disability payment. So I'll leave it at that. I could go on and wax lyrical about it, but I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Colette. So just a final couple of words. Sorry we didn't have time for more questions. It's always the case at these kind of events where there's just not enough time to cover all the questions that we would like to, in such a complicated and, I hope, interesting and inspiring idea. We are, I think, at the beginning of a journey with the minimum income guarantee. You've all raised a lot of the questions that still need to be answered, the challenges that we'll undoubtedly face as we move forward and try to implement this idea. But crucially, it needs continued support. The SNP government has been very important, played a really crucial role in getting the idea off the ground and bringing a coalition of organisations together to really develop this idea. Once that report comes out in December, we will need to go further. We'll need to ensure that all of the recommendations in that report are implemented, and that will be around practical things like how do we increase the Scottish child payment, how do we mitigate the impact of the two-child limit, or address it at source. These will be some of the things that will be in that final report, and that will need support from all of you here in the SNP to continue to encourage leadership of the SNP to stay strong and commit to this idea, because it will be tough to implement, and particularly in the current context. And for those of you from civil society organisations, we need as broad a base as possible to advocate for this policy if it's to become reality. So I will not say any more now. I'm conscious it's Friday night and you've all got good things to do, I hope. But for those of you staying for the rest of the conference, enjoy it. Thank you again to all of our speakers. If you could show your appreciation. Thank you for coming along.